Good afternoon. I'm Kieran, and I'm a volunteer with the BC Bereavement Helpline. I'm excited to introduce our speaker for today's event, Dr. Hajnal. Dr. Hajnal is a grief educator, speaker, and consultant who focuses on the area of grief and loss. Dr. Hajnal has spoken in many different settings and runs numerous workshops in the area of grief and loss as she shares her own experiences and educates on this important topic. In this presentation, Dr. Hajnal explores resilience, growth, and toxic positivity in the face of adversity. We are honored to have her speak today. Thank you, Dr. Hajnal, for presenting When Just Be Positive Does Not Fit.
Thank you to the BCBH, the BC Bereavement Helpline, for inviting me to do this webinar with you. We see an image, I'm going to jump right in. We see this image around resilience and the person in the water who is struggling and the person on the shore, on the dry dock, who's saying, just be resilient. And how many of us can resonate with this sense of, wait a minute, I'm drowning, and what you're offering me are words. And sometimes those words just don't fit and they don't land. And life is full of these challenges, as we see here: COVID, instability, hate crimes, a year in quarantine. And many of us, I think, can relate with our own versions of these and many others, which we're going to explore in a moment. And as part of that, I want to do a land acknowledgement. I'm on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I think it's very fitting also for this context as we think about resiliency and growth and toxic positivity. It's part of what is, creates that, what's happening in the water there, in the Indigenous context here in Canada and around the world. So I think those kind of land acknowledgements are very important. So let's jump into some content. Here's our pathway for today. I want to dip into this idea of toxic positivity. What is it? And what's that feeling that we get when we hear words that are intended to be helpful, but obviously don't feel that way? And then if it's not about being positive, then what? What are our options when we're dealing with some of the tough stuff in life? And so we're going to explore this idea of resilience and PTG, or post-traumatic growth, in that context. And then also think about, what does moving forward mean? Because we are dealing with some difficult times and difficult challenges. And so as part of this, you heard me do the land acknowledgement. We had that image. I want to acknowledge that I know trauma is in the room with us. There are many kinds of trauma. The shock trauma, the traumatic experiences are the ones I think we are most familiar with, but there's many kinds of trauma. The trauma that happens in childhood, the adverse childhood experiences, where we might have abuse and neglect, many forms of traumas, and those can leave us struggling, and many different kinds of impacts. Also intergenerational traumas, where trauma has traveled through the lineage, through different circumstances, whether it's genetically or through actions. These are also traumas that might be in the room with us. Or community traumas. The pandemic is a form of community trauma. Environmental things, anything that shakes the foundation of your community. Forms of racism, oppression, these are community traumas as well. And as you see in this diagram, these are all interconnected. And so it may be that you have experienced many of these. And so I want to acknowledge that likely what's bringing you here today is some form of trauma and some grief. Not all loss is traumatic, but all trauma has loss. And so there are many, many things in life that can spark that sense of loss. Here's one frame, this idea of changes in relationships, work, all the ones that you see there. And notice it can also be things like lost experiences, that the circumstances mean that life isn't able to unfold in the way we had planned or intended. And so this can be lost experiences. COVID is sparking many of those for us right now. And then also in the context of these changes, needs go from being met to unmet. So again, I know that trauma and loss are in the room with us. It's what brings us here today. And my hope is that as we spend this time together, you come away with some new language, some concepts, some ideas, some tools that can support you in this landscape of the trauma and loss that you might be facing in your life. Or if you are supporting someone, you're wanting to be of service to someone who is going through these, you too might find some possibilities in the mix here. So as we turn to toxic positivity, maybe I'm aging myself here, but some of you may remember that song, Don't Worry, Be Happy. Right. And on the surface, positivity can be very helpful. We need positivity in our lives, but there is a point at which it can become toxic and it doesn't serve us. And when we get it from others, it really can feel quite jarring for us. And so what is toxic positivity? This idea that when we're faced with hardship, we should always, have the positive attitude, and that we want to push away brush off those feelings that aren't positive. We want to hide from the uncomfortable feelings that we might be having. And we might even have a sense of guilt or shame for experiencing negative emotions, right? When we feel pulled towards speaking our pain and we think, oh no, I shouldn't talk about that, or I shouldn't feel that. All of these together are at the root of what toxic positivity is all about. And so here's a couple of some things that might, that you've maybe heard said to you, or that maybe you've even said to others. And these are potentially being received by someone as toxic positivity, that everything happens for a reason kind of language, or there's always something to be grateful for what you have, or to stay positive. And so this is, I included this image with this idea of, it's the looking for the rainbows and the unicorns is how I like to think about them, that sometimes these platitudes just really don't fit the experience that we're happening. If we're dealing with, for example, maybe what are the grief and loss that brings us here is that we're dealing with someone dear to us has died by a homicide, or has died by suicide. And so when we hear everything happens for a reason, it can feel like another hit to the experience that we're having. So the idea is that, part of what's underneath toxic positivity is all that it represents are things that are actually not helpful for us. We know that suppressing our unpleasant feelings actually isn't good for us. We also know that this idea of compulsory happiness and gratitude also isn't good for us. And if you think about it, if we have to be happy, if we have to express gratitude, that means we actually can't be advocates. We can't speak what's not working right in the world, right? And so this is that piece there that speaks about can uphold oppression. We need to be able to speak to the tough stuff. And it's also not helpful for us to be making, for example, decisions or to make our comments in an effort to be comfortable, right? Comfort is the driver. I think often those platitudes from others are coming out of their own discomfort, and they're trying to get out of their discomfort about our circumstances. And so that's their driver, as opposed to actually coming from a place of being with the pain, your pain, our collective pain. And then blind optimism, where, one of the examples I can give in an unrelated, but I think descriptive context is this idea that you think you're going to get 100% on an exam when you haven't studied or prepared for it, right? That would be an example of blind optimism. But sometimes we do that in life, and it's not helpful for us. And then the final piece here is this idea of fixed outcome expectations, right? That we are supposed to feel things, that we're supposed to find closure, that we're supposed to have it all figured out. And that positivity driver is part of why this, again, not helpful for us, because it's trying to fix the outcome and the expectations of what's alive for us. So if it's not going to be positive and we're looking sort of to the antidote or a different way to be able to hold our experiences, what might that mean for us? And so, you saw in that very first image that that resilience was being said, just be resilient. And there's a lot of validity to this idea of resilience. So yes, it can be in the conversation, but I think it's important that we put a little, understanding and some nuance to resilience. And so resilience is both a process of adaptation and it's a set of capacities, right? And so as we see in this definition here, it's the capacity of individuals to navigate towards psychological, social, cultural, and physical resources that can support and sustain well-being. But not only is it about navigating, but it's about negotiating for those resources, right? To be able to, so that we have access, we can negotiate for them, and that they can be provided in culturally meaningful ways. Okay, so this idea of capacity, I think, is important for us. It's not just about being positive, right? It's about how do we get to what we need in order to survive, and hopefully along the way a sense of movement and getting beyond just like that person who feels like they're drowning. Okay. Another really important piece here, one of the things I don't like about many of the definitions of resilience is they're so rooted in the individual. It's all on you. So if you're drowning, it's all on you. Just kick a little harder, right? And you'll be able to get through the mix, or be a little stronger, right? And it's not always that way. If you think about the example of if we refer someone for counseling, but they have no way to actually get to the counselor, they can't afford the counselor, or let's say they could get to and they could afford, but the wait is 12 months to be able to work with the counselor or some other kind of service provider, then what does that mean for resilience? And why would it be all on the individual? And that's where, again, this idea of the collective, it's not just on the individual, there's a collective capacity that is important in the mix of resilience and how we can support each other. And again, that idea of positive and being strong, very much individually oriented. But what if it's also about collective capacity? And to go along with that, this idea of growth and thinking about movement. Resilience and growth are not necessarily the same thing, and having access to resources doesn't necessarily mean there will be growth, right? That things shift drastically, for example. But growth potential is there. And part of both resilience and growth is the way we talk to ourselves, the language we use. And so this is part of why I like to bring awareness to language in the work that I do, why we're talking about words that on the surface seem positive, but actually might not be very helpful. So how we talk to ourselves and how we construct meaning of our experiences is very important in the mix. And hope is there, not the rainbows and unicorns, impossible hope, but very practical hope that has a sense of moving us, leading towards, getting out of the water, of not feeling like we're drowning anymore, and potentially even to something more. And I'm just going to draw your attention when we talk about growth to this image. And you see lots of breakage here, but you also see gold in the joinery and the way that the cracks have been filled. And we're going to come back to this, but I just wanted to bring your attention to it, and I'll explain it a little bit more. So again, if it's not about always being positive, then we have this idea of being resilient and negotiating and capacity and collective and language and meaning. These are all things that can support us, that we can tap into individually as a community, and that person on the dock, right, can now imagine that maybe there's some different things they can have on offer to support each other. So, as we relate all of these pieces together, notice positivity is here. So it's not about not being positive, but it's about taking it to that territory where it's actually at the exclusion of the tough stuff. So resilience, growth, and positivity are all interconnected. They're also all surrounded by self-awareness. What language am I using for myself? What are my beliefs about what I should be doing or expectations I'm holding myself to? And then even around that pink circle is the idea of community, right? And collective. What else is there? What are the communities and other sources that you can tap into, that you belong to? Okay? So here's some considerations, trying to tie all these different pieces together. Remember, we talked about not being comfortable with discomfort. And so that's something for us to check in with ourselves, right? Whether we're the person who's grieving and trying to make sense of our experiences, or whether we're the support person who is wanting to offer to say the right thing or to offer some kind of assistance. Checking in, what's our level of comfort with discomfort? I know that's a bit of a paradox, right? But again, we don't want comfort to be the driver. What if we could find a way to sit with the discomfort in a way that doesn't overwhelm us so much? Okay, so this is something for us to think about, and I'm going to give you a little bit more support around all of these as we go forward. And then what's our comfort with a range of emotions? I think sometimes we think a narrow band of emotions is better, but what if it's actually about working with the range of emotions? And then what standards or expectations are we holding ourselves to? In the context of trauma work, of grief work, sometimes, we think it's all supposed to be wrapped up in a bow and figured out, and I'm supposed to be healed by Thursday at 4. And it just doesn't work that way. Trauma work and grief work are not held by the calendar. They're held in our mind, body, spirit, in our hearts. And so we have to be careful what timelines we're holding ourselves to. And this whole idea of re-grief, that so many of our experiences, yes, they happened at a particular point in time in our lives, and it might be over, a number of days, months, years, or it might have happened in an instant. As we change, as our experiences, as from a child to different developmental stages, or as we get married and have our own children, as an example too, then our experiences from childhood, when we have our own children, can invite us to re-experience what happened in childhood, right? So this idea of re-grief is that things come back and they weave into our life story in different ways, and we reinterpret and we construct new meaning. And so again, with resilience and growth, it's not about a particular outcome. Remember, it's about a process. And so again, what are we holding ourselves to? A standard of growth, right? That I have to come back better, bigger, stronger, faster, all of those kinds of things. What if that's not the right thing for you, right? That's somebody else's expectations for you. And so what does healing mean even, right? When, is it that we go back to the way things were? But the reality is our experiences often mean that we will never find that place again. So does that mean we're not healed? No, I think there's lots of potential and possibility for us, but we have to be careful what standard we're holding ourselves to. And then also in all of this, it's about noticing our language too, right? So are we using a language of I am not enough, or is, that's that voice of shame in the mix? Are we, berating ourselves for being negative, for example, right? Or what language are others using with us? So these are some of the considerations that we have around this. And so here's some, possibility in light of that. This idea of being comfortable with discomfort. And here's some examples you see on the one side. The toxic positivity, some of the same kinds of things we were looking at before. Good vibes only, just be positive, never give up, just be happy, see the good in everything, okay? And again, we're not saying no to positivity, but imagine if we shift our language just a little, and that it begins with validating the truth, the reality, the tough stuff of our experience. So for example, this is hard, right? Starting off by acknowledging that it's a hard circumstance, or to acknowledge that it might be very normal to have some negativity in the situation that you're in, or to acknowledge that it's pretty hard to be positive right now, right? Again, it doesn't mean that at some point you might not, that you will feel more positive potentially, but maybe it's okay for it to feel pretty hard right now, and whatever right now ends up meaning, right, for some period of time. So again, there's both validation of the discomfort of the hard, and then there's also those seeds of hope in the mix. And again, it's not about false hope, it's about practical, right? And so what you've done hard things and before, and I believe in you. The very first line there. This is hard. You've done hard things before, and I believe in you. Right. So we're acknowledging both the pain and the possibility. Right? So hopefully there's some language options for you here in the mix. And then this whole idea of the range of emotions, right? And I fully acknowledge that it's probably impossible to read all of the words on that image. It's not about reading all of them. It's to, that image there is to represent that there's so many emotions. And, I believe they're all necessary. They're all important. They're all information. They're guideposts for us, guiding us towards what does come next, what's needed in this moment. I like to think of emotions as energy in motion, and they're intended to move. Even things like, be happy. Happiness is momentary. It's not a state that we get to and we stay there forever. And so I'll be honest, there are emotions on there that that I don't go, oh goody, I want to hang out in the uncomfortable, right? In the fear, in the sadness, in the disgust. It's not that I want to hang out there, but I appreciate that there is value in hanging out there. There's messaging for me in that. And if I begin to see it as possibility, then it can invite what comes next for me. And so it's an invitation to bring our curiosity. If we're open to exploring and working with all of our emotions, let's be curious about what's underneath them. And so if we have anger at the circumstance, imagine what might be underneath that. As this diagram shows, there could be many things that are inviting some support, that are inviting our attention and our intention, if you will, too. And that this might be the thing that guides us for how we're able to construct some meaning to the experience that we're having. Okay, and so also in this idea of constructing meaning, I find metaphor can be very helpful, and so this is another way to bring our language. It's how we frame our experiences, and so in that first image there, we see the broken vase and we see all the cracks and we see holes and some pieces feel like they're missing, right? And this is an example where if we try to go back to the way it was, we can't. There are pieces missing, right? There's a hole there. So we cannot use this vase in the way that it was intended to be used in the first place. So what does that mean? That we throw it all away, or that we can never have flowers again, in the vase with water and that kind of thing? The invitation becomes, okay, let's acknowledge the brokenness. And what can we do from there? And so we see two ways to think about that. We see the idea of the mosaic, right? Where we actually embrace the breakage and we build something anew from that. And so the mosaic knows that there was brokenness. We see all of those pieces, and out of the pieces comes something anew, right? And it can be whatever you want to create out of that. Or on the far side where we see the bowl with the golden joinery, and if you remember to the image we had before for most post-traumatic growth, this is the idea of kintsugi, which is a Japanese tradition of how you repair pottery. It's this idea of golden joinery. And so it acknowledges that the broken is part of the history of the object. So what if our brokenness and our challenges are part of our history? And so rather than trying to pretend that they don't exist and try to push them away and push the emotions and push the grief away, what if we honor it? And the idea in kintsugi is that the cracks are filled with precious metal. whether it be gold or silver or platinum, so that we're actually honoring our breakage. Again, this is not about platitudes, but to say, tough stuff has happened in my life and it's influencing who I am today. It's influencing how I show up. It's influencing how I am in relationship. And I want to turn towards it and appreciate that on some level, that breakage, because it's influencing who I am today. One other metaphor, just to perhaps give, again, this is not to force meaning at all. That's not what this is about. But sometimes new language, metaphor is another form of language. How we can think about our experiences supports us being able to find that comfort and discomfort. And this is the idea that, life before loss, and then this substantive experience happens, and maybe we feel like we have a hole, right? That you see the black circle of the loss there. And again, those expectations, those beliefs, we think, oh, okay, the loss is supposed to shrink and it's supposed to feel smaller, right? And that I will, get back to my life before loss, right? Well, what if there's another way to think about it? What if there's life before loss, and then there is that sense of the darkness and the hole, and it's not about that hole necessarily gets smaller, right? But what if there is the possibility that life can grow around that loss? Okay, so notice that the shift comes in life, not in trying to make that loss go away, not in trying to make it smaller, but to imagine that I can hold that and it can inform my life, and life can grow in some other ways. Okay, so to summarize all of this, to think about where we started, where we're drowning and someone is offering us a platitude that's not very helpful. What I'm advocating is this validating of your experience, to both acknowledge the pain and the possibility. It's not an either or. Life can be both things. I think this diagram, of this fishhook cactus, you think about a cactus and it has built-in boundaries with the spikes on it, and yet and it can hurt, right? And we can be pricked by the cactus, but it's important. Those are an important defense mechanism, and we need those. But there's also beauty in those defense mechanisms, and there's beauty in the flowers. And so it's both pain and possibility. And we've talked a little bit about the idea of optimism and hope, but not the blind optimism. Let's sometimes we need to be brutal. Sometimes it's, this situation can never be fixed and it's never going to go away. And I have hope that new things can emerge out of that. I can discover things out of it, right? And it can also be about setting boundaries. Again, sometimes the people who we think are going to be the ones to support us in our adverse circumstances, sometimes they're actually not the people that we need to get our support from. And so setting boundaries on who we engage with is sometimes important in the mix here. And then any movement or meaning and sense making, it's defined by you. No one has the right to tell you how you should feel about your experiences, how you should make sense of it. That said, I encourage you to find those meaningful collaborations, the collectives, the communities. Where can you find support as you work through all of this, as you claim both the pain and the possibility? Remember, it's not all on you in that individual resilience. Remember, it's about capacity. It can come from community and people around you as well, and part of validating your experience and making sense of what has happened to you. So I hope this gives you some, that something's resonating for you in this, that you are giving yourself some permission to speak a truth, to declare something for yourself, to give yourself some permission in your own experience, and so that you might not feel like you're drowning quite as much in the mix here. Or if you're the person on the dock, if you are in service, in support of someone who is struggling with some adverse experiences. Maybe you have some new language or some new ideas of how you might be able to help them out. So with that, I will thank you for spending some time with me today. And as I said, I hope there's been something of value in it for you. And as I mentioned in the video, I hope there's something that's been of value for you. I see, and I look forward to answering those. If you have a question, please add it in the chat. Or if there's something you just want to acknowledge in the video that resonated for you, feel free to comment there as well. So the first question we have is, you mentioned that toxic positivity can uphold oppression. Can you explain that further? It's the idea that if we cannot speak about what's hard, what's problematic, what hurts, what oppresses, if this veil of positivity means we cannot speak about the tough stuff, then there's a problem there. And so if we're not able to call out dynamics that we think are wrong, that are not working, problems, that doesn't serve us, it doesn't serve our community, it doesn't evolve us. So it's about, if positivity is hiding something, that is potentially problematic. So this, again, as I mentioned, is this idea of we need to be able to speak to the pain. And it's not that we have to live in it, right? And it's not that we can't ever be positive, but that we cannot push away the pain and pretend it's not there. One of the ways I like to I see we have more questions, so let me go on to the next one here. I can always come back. And yeah, I see a comment there. It's hard for me not to try to be positive when my friends and loved ones are hurting. What is a good thing to say to someone? How can I improve my language? And I think it's to acknowledge your pain about their pain, right? That it's again, that they know that they're not alone. I think the tough stuff, one of our great fears is that will mean people will disappear from our lives, that we won't be received, that we won't matter, that we won't belong. So for us to say to someone, gosh, I'm hurting because I see that you're hurting. And I wish that the circumstances could be different. Right? So notice that I'm acknowledging that it's really hard, and I'm letting that individual know that I'm there for them. Right? So again, this idea of acknowledging what is and letting them know that you're not going away, even in the face of the tough stuff, would be some possibilities for being able to acknowledge that people around you are hurting and you want to be there to support them. It could be that I wish I knew, sometimes I say to my friends, I wish I had a magic wand. But I know that we need to work with the difficulties, the challenges. So I'm here to help you try to figure things out, for example, or to support you and offer some support in particular ways. Another question we have, do you have any recommendations for fostering a supportive environment without forcing happiness? In a way that, what I was just speaking to, this idea of, acknowledging whatever emotions might be alive, whether it's anger, right? If there's anger there, let's talk about being angry. That relates back to the very first question too, about oppression. We need to be able to get angry. Anger is not a bad emotion. It has a bad rap, I think, because often anger and violence go hand in hand. But anger is also about passion. Anger is also about saying there's something wrong, something needs to change. And so I think it can be very supportive to get angry, for example, right? And to advocate for change in different circumstances. We see that in the face of COVID, people are unhappy and rightly so. We've been dealing with this now for years, right? And it hasn't been easy. It's been hard, and our lives have been drastically changed
by this experience. And so it's okay to be angry. It's okay to want this to be different, right? It's not about pretending that it didn't happen, or pretending that we'll get back to everything the way that it was before. That's impossible. We can't. We've had 2 years of living with this. It's now in the story of our lives. And so what do we take from this experience now going forward, right? And so I think this idea of being supportive without forcing happiness, it has to be rooted, has to start in this idea of acknowledging what is, that there's tough stuff going on, that it hasn't been easy. And then, we use that to spark, and we've seen it in the face of COVID, for example, how creative people have been to, have parties in Zoom land, right? That in ways that they had never even imagined possible before, or how many things we've figured out ways we can do online. Is it ideal? No. Do we have to love it? No. Is it possibility? Yes. Is it an option we can do right now? Yes. And we can have that sense of hope and look for ways for things to be able to happen differently in the future. And it doesn't mean we have to say, oh, goody, another chance to be on Zoom. Here we are online. I appreciate the sort of irony in all of that. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of ideas here. Let me take another question. I saw some phrases on the slide about language, but it was a bit blurry. Can you repeat some of those? Sure, I'm going to bring it, find that one in my handouts. And again, some of the toxic positivity, I'll start with those. You'll get over it is one example. And an alternative to that would be, this is hard. You've done hard things before, and I believe in you. Right? So again, notice that sort of pathway of acknowledging that it's hard and that I believe in you. I'm here, and you've done hard things before. I'm here to support you now. Another potentially toxic positivity, just be positive, that language. And a validation and hope, that alternative. I know there's a lot that could be wrong. What could go right? Right? So again, it's not about, that is, what could go right is not about saying, let's pretend nothing's going to go wrong or hasn't gone wrong. But we want to get some idea of some balance. So acknowledging some of the challenges, and to acknowledge that maybe there's some things that have gone well in the mix, right? That things have gone right. Another example, good vibes only. Right? You may have heard that said, or we've said it. And an alternative would be, all vibes are welcome here. To let the friends know that it doesn't, or the people that we're interacting with, that all of their emotions are welcome. Stop being so negative. Right? Stop being so negative. Or sometimes it's calm down, or get it together. Stop being so negative. And a potentially more helpful alternative to that would be, it's perfectly or pretty normal to have some negativity in this situation. Right? Again, to validate the experience and let someone know that it's a challenging time. Toxic positivity, think happy thoughts. And an alternative would be, it's probably pretty hard to be positive right now. I'm putting out some good energy into the world for you. Right? So sometimes, and I'll acknowledge that last was in good energy. Sometimes it's about saying, I'm going to hold hope that things can evolve. Because I think sometimes when we're, in the heaviness, it's hard for us to have hope. And so one of the things we can do in support is we'll hold hope for others. That's one of the ways I like to think of about myself and the work that I do, is that I'll be a guardian of hope and possibility, because I get that sometimes when we're in the muck, it's hard to hold hope and imagine that things can be different. So I put myself in the energy of, I'll be the guardian of that for others. And let's give one more example here. Just be happy, right? Just be happy. It's never, it's an alternative is it's never fun to feel like that is there. Oh, sorry. It's never fun to feel like that. Is there something we can do today that you'd enjoy? Okay. So again, acknowledging that it's pretty hard right now, and invite what might, is there something we could do to give you a little bit of a break from the toughness, the challenge of what's going on, right? So it's not, again, about not pretending, it's not about trying to push it away, but recognizing that in this moment, maybe there's something that we could do, go for a walk, right? Or watch a movie, or call someone, or read a book, something to bring a little ease in the current moment. Again, it's not taking away the circumstances, but inviting a little peace and ease in the current moment. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more language, some possibility of, again, how you can acknowledge what is and offer support and a sense of belonging and mattering to those in your life that you care about, or you're saying it to yourself in a self-compassion kind of way. I'm just looking to see if there are any other questions. Or any other comments. I encourage you to look around on the BCBH website. There are other resources there as well that would hopefully lend some support in the mix. Okay, so this will be available for you to watch again or to share with others. And as I've said a couple of times, I hope this has been helpful for you. I'm just noticing a few of more comments. The idea of resilience as a collective mindset. Yeah, that's, I think, really important for us to recognize. It's not all on the individual. So with that, I thank you for those of you who are able to join us live today. And I wish you the very best for the rest of your day or whatever time it is that you're watching this. Thanks very much, everyone.